Utah, Hudson Valley, New York.
However you are and whatever you are, welcome, good souls, to the greatest show on this earth. No, I'm just kidding. But we have the greatest time on Paranormal Now Radio. So thank you all for joining us as we traverse the cosmic highway of paranormal portals and tantalizing turnoffs. Joining us live tonight is Suzanne and Scott Ramsey, co-authors of the AZTEC UFO Incident. Was it just as significant as Roswell, more important, or a giant hoax? If you are resistant to the idea that another UFO crash conspiracy occurred in the late 1940s, I think you should hear what Suzanne and Scott have to say this night. Now, we have a lot to discuss as we move along. I just want to give you some updates on news that I am really excited about. So tomorrow, 4:33 EST, SpaceX is launching the first manned flight since 2011 for the United States of America. So that's a really exciting day. It's also the first private flight bringing astronauts into space. So if I can, I have another obligation. If I can, I will definitely be watching because I really do think it's historic. And I hope that you all get a chance to take a look and watch that moment yourself. As we go tonight, please share your thoughts and experiences with us during or after the show on Facebook.com/ParanormalNowRadio, Twitter @paranormal_now. And of course, as we go tonight, please check out the live stream of our show on Facebook and on YouTube.com/ParanormalPop. And we'll also drop the video links in the KGRA chat room as we go. And for more updates tonight, tomorrow, and repostings of this show, follow us on Twitter @paranormal_now. You can also comment and ask your questions on both the Facebook and YouTube stream, where we can share those comments and questions on screen here as we go. And of course, in the second hour, the Paranormal Radio app lines are open tonight. So in the second hour, we'll give you the cue. You can call in, ask your guest your questions, and just call 85-KGRA live. That's 855-472-5483. And if you, like me, are trying to keep up with the plethora of influx of paranormal science news, ufological news, please go to the kgraradio.com website and subscribe to the Telepath and sign up for that newsletter, and we'll send you all the updates on the latest news. It's amazing. I love it. For those of you who appreciate what it was like pre the domination of the internet, we just did not get information like we do now. And it's not just because of the proliferation of quick news and electronic news. It's science. Science has just progressed so much in the past 20 years. It is astounding, especially space and science news in particular. So tonight, I bring on these two special guests, which I have been doggedly trying to get on for quite some time. And, thank you, Suzanne, for hanging with me throughout all the emails over the past couple of years. For all of you who are familiar with Paranormal Now, about 3 years ago, Frank Thayer, the co-author, was on this show. At the time, it was a podcast, but I really, really wanted to get Suzanne and Scott Ramsey's personal take. Because Scott in particular, I know, Suzanne, maybe you can speak more to this as we go, but I know Scott's been doing this for at least 30 years, investigating the AZTEC UFO incident. So there was just so much knowledge to share tonight. And I promise you, hang in here with us tonight. It'll be fun, and it might just blow your mind. The AZTEC UFO incident, the high desert of New Mexico, March 25th, 1948, early morning, a rancher leaves his house to let his goats out of the corral. There is a loud noise that draws his eyes to the sky, where he sees a silver flying saucer wobbling as if in distress. Suzanne Ramsey discovered the AZTEC incident after her mother read Frank Scully's 1950 book, Behind the Flying Saucers. Having grown up in the Midwest, the Ninos family moved to live in the Four Corners area, where Suzanne owned a small business and pursued media writing and hosting a radio show. She met and married Scott Ramsey after he appeared on her show to discuss his research. Suzanne has traveled extensively, interviewing and pursuing research at university and USAF archives. She is the CEO of Carolina Country Provisions, whose main product is the Uncle Scott's all-natural root beer. And who doesn't love root beer? American classic. The Ramseys live in Mooresville, North Carolina, where their AZTEC research continues. Scott Ramsey, he is foremost researcher into the AZTEC incident, having worked on the story since 1987, discovering archives and pursuing interviews throughout the U.S. His entire career has been in the electrical industry, specializing in magnetic fields and electrical wire. He has worked for Fortune 500 companies and currently as vice president of sales and marketing for Express Wire Services in Charlotte, North Carolina. He is married to Suzanne Ramsey, whom he met in the Four Corners area as well. And while doing the research, nonetheless. I mean, how romantic is that? Two UFO enthusiasts meeting in New Mexico, researching. The Ramseys reside on their North Carolina farm, practicing permaculture and sustainable farming. Good for you guys. And after the couple's successful 2012 AZTEC book, their research continues. Now, the book that I have is from 2015. So I don't know if that's different.
Yeah, there's.
Okay. Well, Scott and Suzanne, welcome so much. We really appreciate you being on the show.
Thanks for having us. We appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Our pleasure.
Yeah. So we got Bill, the producer, just popping in for a moment there. Hey, Bill. So this is a big story. This is a really big story. And I'll just say this right at the start. I think, and maybe you can speak to this better than I can, but I think the reason so many people are resistant to the AZTEC UFO crash, and we'll get to the hoaxing later, but from a more visceral knee-jerk response is that how can two UFOs crash, presumably extraterrestrial civilizations, nearly back to back? What is, I think, a difference of 9 months between Roswell of July 1947. So can you speak to that? Because I think that might help warm us up before the naysayers, start putting up their red flags.
I'll start and have Suzanne do the follow-up. I think it's amazing that one even crashed, but and we have to kind of separate the difference between a crash and possibly being shot down.
Sure.
They are
like a controlled landing, is that?
Yeah, the AZTEC crash was pretty much intact.
Mm-hmm.
A broken porthole is the consistent story we hear time and time again. Nobody that we interviewed over the years ever reported any damage other than the porthole. The Roswell, that was basically a debris field. So there's a big difference between the two, but we can speculate all day long on what brought them down. Was it military because they were flying over Los Alamos and other very restricted areas in the AZTEC case? In the Roswell case, they're flying right over the 509th Roswell Army Airfield down in Roswell, which is home to our only base at the time with nuclear weapons. So there's a lot of reason that people would want to, whatever these were, to shoo them away, so to speak.
Yeah. See, now, okay, my excuse or speculative theory, like many others, is that Roswell UFO and the AZTEC UFO, how could an advanced civilization be shot down by us? And at the time, they were testing new telescope radar technologies that, as you described in the book, can cook ducks out of the sky.
Right.
So, I think if we're dealing with either scouts that are maybe less biological and more like robots, and they're pre-programmed artificial AI, that they're less adaptable, and they were taken by surprise by our technology, or these ETs were taken by surprise by our sudden tech experimentation, though you wouldn't think so because of the Manhattan Project and our testing of these A-bombs. So what do you think brought down this craft?
I don't know, Alan. I've thought about that over the years. It would just all be theory, but possibly because it had been over Los Alamos, maybe they shot at it. I don't know. The hole in the porthole was about the same size as a 50 caliber round, and the bodies resemble being charred or burned, almost like not burned by fire, but maybe mass. Trying to think of the word I'm trying to use. No, just losing pressure inside the craft.
Okay. And there could be numerous ways to explain that, do you think?
Yeah.
Okay. And so it could be natural. It could be something in the environment that could cause that as well.
It may have. That's the toughest part of the whole case, is trying to figure out why maybe one or two. I mean, there's some theories that there were two at Roswell. And then you add AZTEC, that's three within, 8 months that come down.
Yeah. Okay. So just to start, do you, Suzanne, think that extraterrestrials are visiting planet Earth?
I'm really comfortable with that. I was raised in a house that we had conversations about things like that. My dad was a doctor. My parents were very book focused. Our house was full of books. And each night at dinner, we would sit down, even as a child, and we would talk about different things. Aliens did come up a couple times. Wasn't a main part of our conversation, but it certainly was. And so I was never afraid of it. I always assumed that it was possible. And when Mom read Frank Scully's book came out in the 50s, early 50s, and this would be the mid 60s that she read the book. So I don't know if she picked it up at a yard sale or something. I don't know where it came from, but she was so enthusiastic about it, and actually that's why my parents ended up eventually moving to AZTEC, New Mexico. So she was so interested in the topic and in that isolated incident that she thought I wanted to live near to it. And sadly, when she moved there, she found that people were ambivalent about it.
Uninterested. Yeah.
That's exactly it. But she thought, "Oh, this is the greatest thing," and there was just nothing there. So she was disappointed. And then, of course, for me to end up, spending time with Scott and certainly marrying Scott, I think was very interesting to her. She was always very enthusiastic about the research, and it was a very positive experience for her.
Was your first conversation together, the two of you, about ufology? He
was actually a guest on my radio show.
I love that. That's awesome. Yeah. So, Suzanne, at the time you were...
There's a really interesting story that goes into this, how we ended up together related to that. But
please share if you feel comfortable. Yeah.
He had been on my radio show several times, and I had studied Japanese, and he came out to do a show, and a group of Japanese film producers contacted me with the Film Association, and asked me, could you come and translate for us? And they referred to him as Mr. X. I had no idea who he was. They didn't tell me his name. And I had met him once or twice before. And when I got there and I saw who he was, I walked up and shoved him. I said, "It's you." And so we had a good laugh. But what ended up happening was Scott and several others asked me if I could help out in planning the conference in the UFO conference in AZTEC. And I had done that nationally, had done some very large conferences and events.
Yeah.
And I said, sure, I'd be happy to help out. And it was the year the war broke out. And so we weren't going to have as many international people joining us. And so I suggested that we might do a drawing for us to generate some enthusiasm for local people, that they had a date with Scott. And it turns out, long story short, I'll fast forward. It was Ted Lohman and, oh gosh.
Peter Davenport.
Peter Davenport.
No, Peter Gersten.
Peter Gersten.
Yeah.
That's right, not Davenport, Gersten. They drew the name and it happened to be mine. And of course, being involved, I would have certainly thrown it away and just taken another one. But it turned out that somebody else put it in there. And my name was even misspelled. And so 3 months later, we did go out on that date. And 3 months later, we were married. And at our wedding, we found out that there was over 60 names put in that bin that people all over the country had put in, had bought tickets. So that was our kind of goofy.
What would have happened if you
together?
What would have happened if you didn't pull that ticket?
I've asked Scott that, and he said, "Well, I probably would have asked you out at some point." And I said, "I'm getting old, so."
Yeah, I think that's fantastic that you forged a connection with a mutual interest. Scott, what were you talking about on Suzanne's show?
The whole research behind AZTEC. At that time, I had gone down to Maxwell Air Force Base, which is the archives for all the Air Force, other than personnel records. And I went down to see if there was any mention of AZTEC in any of the files and reports. And it turned out there were quite a few. And what kind of amazed me is it just didn't have 1948. There were correspondence between CIA, FBI, Air Force, which we still have here. Who's leaking the story to Frank Scully? If it was the hoax theory, it should have been a file with a beginning and an end. And when Scully's whole thing developed, then it should have just been marked known hoax. But the FBI and Air Force looked into this case for a number of years.
Okay, so let's talk about the root of this entire story as it is known to us, the outsiders. So it starts with Frank Scully. So how did Frank Scully get the information to publish this in his book in 1951?
No, 1950. The book came out September 16th, 1950.
Okay.
He was approached by, first Silas Newton, a very wealthy oil man, introduced Frank Scully to a Dr. G. And Dr. G was a composite of eight to nine scientists that had worked on the craft. Silas Newton also had a business sidekick by the name of Leo Gaybauer. A lot of people over the years thought Leo Gaybauer, being a G, was the Dr. G. Turns out he certainly was not. Anyways, these scientists, through Silas Newton and then eventually one-on-one with Frank Scully, leaked the story and told Frank that this is an amazing story and it needs to be broken, and we'll give you all the details. And not to worry, because this story is going to eventually come out within about a year, which turned out, obviously, that was never going to happen. And so that's basically how it started. Frank Scully, from 1949 to 1950, interviewed the scientists, sat down in 1950, wrote the book, came out, was a very good seller, went on the bestseller list, 64,000 copies of the book were sold. And then the government FBI, CIA, Air Force, they all came down on Scully and tried to hoax the story by basically getting the two, Leo Gaybauer and Silas Newton, into some legal trouble.
Mm-hmm. The story itself.
Mm-hmm.
This is 1950 when this is published. Now, in 1947, that's when we have the first major story. Kenneth Arnold covering a UFO phenomena, right? And so it's not like today where information, it spreads like wild, fire, like on the internet instantly. So the fact that this book sold such a high number of copies in 1950, what was happening with our culture? What was happening between Kenneth Arnold and Thayer that so many people had so much interest?
Well, we were just at the start of a very long Cold War with the Soviets. UFO sightings were happening all over the United States, Canada, actually the world for that matter. And flying saucers and that whole mystery was very much on people's mind.
Mm-hmm.
And Frank Scully's book was the first hardback book out on UFOs.
Yeah.
If I may.
Sure.
Something about Frank Scully. Frank Scully was a highly regarded author. He was gifted, really gifted. If you have an opportunity to read his book, it is available in paperback. I would highly recommend it. He has a very lyrical way about his writing. But my belief is, in researching Frank so thoroughly, that he was selected specially to tell this information to for several reasons. He could be trusted, and just some examples of how he could be trusted in other ways in life. People that when they were in trouble, whether they were Hollywood people or they were friends, neighbors, people down on their luck, they could go to him and he would always take care of them, keep things confidential. But also he had a way of just keeping his lips shut. And that was something that they really needed to count on someone. In fact, he wrote several books for people. Well, you've got to trust someone you've got to really trust somebody to have them ghostwrite your book. And so I really believe if you study into him, he was specifically chosen to share this information.
Because he was trusted and he was a good writer.
He was a very good writer. Yeah, he was highly trusted, and he kept his mouth shut. To the day he died, he did not share the information of who the scientists were.
Okay, now we're coming up to the first break, and I mean, there's just so much to cover here. We barely touched the tip of the iceberg. And when we come back, maybe we'll do this in the second hour once we cover the story a little more. But I had a conversation with Kevin Randall, and Kevin still maintains that this is a hoax. So I think it'll be helpful for everybody listening to really explain the depth of this hoax when we get back on the other side. And we're talking about an intact UFO that either crashed or landed in some capacity, and there were reported 14 to 16 alien bodies inside this with multiple eyewitnesses. So we'll talk more on that when we get back on the other side. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in tonight. This is a really, really exciting time. Alan B. Smith for Paranormal Now. I will see you on the flip side.
Okay, nurse, let's get this man to the ER stat.
Right away, doctor.
We see this every day. Heart attack or angina pain due to blocked and clogged arteries. Chelation can remove obstructions or blockages from arteries and help avoid painful and expensive surgery. Now there's Angioprim. It's a liquid oral chelation product that you take with juice. You start to feel the results fast. Angioprim increases blood flow all over the body, and that means more energy and strength to take on the day with less aches and pains. 60 years of research has gone into chelation, and Angioprim is the result. A safe and easy way to unblock your veins and arteries from buildup that slow circulation.
Paging Dr. Jones. Please report to the emergency room right away.
Log on now to angioprim.com. That's ANGIOPRIM.com. Or to speak with a trained consultant. Give Angioprim a call at 954-882-7221. That's 954-882-7221.
Hello, this is Commander Cobra of Task Force Griffin, KGR Radio, KGRradio.com. And I need you to be a member like myself of the People's Mosquito and help rebuild and fly this great aircraft. I have 3 friends here today also who are going to ask you the same thing. Consider becoming a member of the People's Mosquito.
Hello, I'm John Lilly. I'm the Managing Director of the People's Mosquito, and I'd like you to donate or support our flying program.
Hi, I'm Ross Sharp. I'm the Director of Engineering of the People's Mosquito, and I'd like you to help us rebuild this magnificent aircraft.
Hi, I'm Bill Ramsey. I'm the Operations Director and Team Pilot of the People's Mosquito. I need you to join us and become my wingman.
Join all of us and be a supporter of the People's Mosquito program. Thanks.
Hey, is that a new music app?
Yeah, check it out. Surfer Music Discovery. It links to thousands of online stations, but the twist is you see the song names and artists that are now playing live.
That's different. No guessing. Looks like a waterfall of music.
So many formats. Rock, oldies, country, R&B, jazz, and a whole lot more.
How's that spelled?
Surfer. S-U-R-F-R.
Is it expensive?
It's free. No need to sign up or sign in.
Get the Surfer Music app free from Google Play or the App Store.
Are you intrigued by Paranormal Talk Radio? You'll love the new Paranormal Radio app from TalkStream Live. You'll find a great selection of talk shows covering UFOs, ghosts, strange phenomena, and much more. Download the Paranormal Radio app now and start listening to the very best in paranormal talk entertainment, including the network you're listening to right now, the Paranormal Radio app. Free in Google Play and the iOS App Store.
You listen to us, and we listen to you. And so does the CIA. KGRARadio.com.
Lost in a bad way, cost me my family. Chaos around me, can't hear my heart say, hey, that's the wrong way. Hey, that's the wrong way. Hey, that's the wrong way. That's the wrong way. You're lost in a bad way, starting to let go. Gone too far the wrong way. Can take it all back now.
And welcome back to Paranormal Now. This is Alan B. Smith, your most grateful host. Taking us out of the break was Septemberio. And if you want to find out more about Septemberio's music, go to septemberio.com. Okay, now hold on tight. It's going to get really messy, but in a good way. I've got Scott and Suzanne Ramsey on with me tonight, and we're talking about their book, The AZTEC UFO Incident. I have read this book twice because it is important, if indeed what Scott and Suzanne and Frank Thayer have put forth is true. This is equally as big as Roswell, if not bigger. I don't even know if you could measure those two against each other. Can you, Scott and Suzanne?
Roswell to Aztec?
Yeah.
Now, this is coming from someone who's put a lot of years in the research, but I think over the years, people like Bill Steinman, Scott and Suzanne, Frank Thayer, Mike Price, Bob Coford, and the list goes on of people that have researched it and had many, many documents. Bob Coford out in California has come up with some amazing documents recently. It's I think it's a little more well documented than Roswell. I really do.
Do you think people are hearing about this enough? I know you guys are doing radio programs and you're getting the word out there, but in the social media sphere, Roswell takes the cake, right? I mean,
sure, yeah.
and people have been talking about it for decades, so I can understand that. But I feel like your first book, was it 2009 it came out?
That's about right.
I think 2009, yeah. And then you did a DVD documentary in 2004. So this has been around too. The awareness of this. Craig, I'm sorry, what was his name? Oh my gosh, I forget the author's name. But he passed away, I think, in 2003. Had written about AZTEC in his book.
Oh, Chris Evans.
Yes.
Yeah.
Great job. Yep, we're going on almost 20 years now, and I just feel like we got to push this because it's astounding. So I won't trip over my words here, and I'll let you do the explaining for me.
I think Suzanne had a follow up on that.
If I could,
sure, yeah.
I think the reason that Roswell is so much more widely known is it was the first biggie, no question about it.
Mm-hmm.
They learned so much by their mistakes. Think about the newspaper. Think about, there was just so many mistakes that were made. And 9 months later, there were all types of changes and policies put into place. So it was a much smoother, slicker event. I think another issue is that if you look on the internet, you'll see about 50% of the time it talks about that AZTEC UFO is a hoax.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll see that word, big letters, hoax. Well, 4 of the biggie people that skeptics that have talked about it and refer to it as a hoax, out of them, 3 of them have never even been to the site. So they've really not properly researched. And I guess I look at the other side of it too. This is the type of story, it is so comprehensive. You have the pre-sightings at Los Alamos, the police officers, you have the on-site witnesses, you have the incident itself, you have the scientists, you have the cover-up. All those things we've been able to document. And if you only get halfway through the story, just like watching a movie, if you only get halfway through the movie, you feel it's going in one direction, you can make an assumption. And that's what I really feel like so many people with it being a hoax have done. They've only halfway heard the story. And I think that that's really put a cap on who's able to hear the story.
Right.
They write up as hoax and there's no need to further, investigate it.
Right. But when you see something with your own eyes, it's real. Can you tell us about the eyewitnesses to that event? Maybe starting with Sandoval or the rancher.
Sure. Manuel Sandoval was basically a part-time police officer in Cuba, New Mexico. He worked on the southeastern, which became southwestern, which became El Paso, but he worked on the oil line, running security during the day to make sure that the oil pipes were secure. And at night, he took up a part-time job where in Cuba, New Mexico, about an hour and a half from AZTEC on your way to Albuquerque. And Andy Andrews was highway patrol that was based in Farmington. And those two would meet certain nights in Cuba for coffee and pie, for the lack of a better word. And it was a little bit of a stretch for Andy Andrews. He was out of his jurisdiction by about a half hour as the car drives. But they would meet because they were always comparing notes on these unusual objects they would see in the night sky.
Mm-hmm.
And so the night of the crash, or early morning hours of the UFO incident at AZTEC, they had decided a couple of nights before that if they saw another one of these, no matter what, they were going to pursue it. Instead of just parking their squad cars and watching this thing fly over, they were going to try to find out where it was going.
Sure.
And in that case, Manuel Sandoval pursued it that night, and he lost it several times back and forth, as we talk about in our book, but eventually came across it out on Hart Canyon Road. So I guess when you look through all the witnesses, and of course, then there's the rancher, and then there's the oil field workers we've interviewed. You couldn't get all these people together in a bar one night to make up a story and stick to it. They were from all different parts of the country.
Yeah.
So, and we had a Baptist minister that was one of the witnesses,
Well,
new to the area.
Who did you speak to that was still alive? That was a witness.
Let's see. We're going to start. Ken Farley was alive. Reed was alive. Doug Nolan was alive. Doug died shortly after we interviewed him. He was struggling when we interviewed him because he had just had a massive stroke. So actually, several strokes. But again, everybody's story was consistent.
Did you get anybody on camera or audio recordings?
Yes, we have Doug Nolan for almost 2.5, 2 3/4 hours.
Okay. And what about on camera or audio?
Audio only.
Audio only. Do you have anyone on film?
I don't think we get secondhand witnesses, daughters and relatives on camera, but not the actual.
If I can mention, when Scott first came upon this incident, he felt that within 6 months he would have it either solved, it happened or it didn't happen. This is 30 plus years later. So, I guess my point is, you don't always go prepared knowing what you're going to find. And we have over 55,000 documents directly and indirectly related. There's no way that we could have, and I think there's no way you could have known that was what you would come upon. And if you would have known it, you probably wouldn't have done it. You know what I mean? It's just
a
huge task.
And I think that might be a factor when you compare AZTEC to Roswell. Roswell, it was cracked open in 1978. And so there were still eyewitnesses alive that could go on camera. I mean, I remember being a kid watching Unsolved Mysteries. I mean, that episode just blew it off the charts, because you're sitting there with your eyes looking at these just regular old folks,
listening to Jeffrey Marcel talk about it.
Yeah. And that, I think that's really what captivated so many people. Do you have any regrets about not getting people on camera, or do you think it doesn't matter and you've got the goods?
I don't really think it mattered. We interviewed him. We interviewed him with other people there that witnessed it. Sometimes their family members. In Ken Farley's case, a lot of people, when we interviewed Ken, I don't know. I mean, maybe in retrospect, someday I'll look back and kick myself. When we interviewed Doug, Doug was in Las Vegas. We were here in North Carolina. And with his health, it would have been really a tough task to fly out there and video. It was much easier to audio tape them.
Sure. Are you guys working on a documentary?
We're working on another book.
It'll be related to a document.
Yeah.
It'll be hand in hand.
Very cool.
Yep.
Yeah. Because you did allude that you would do another book in this one. And you said that there would be more information supporting information or data facts.
Oh, we have a lot now. Yeah.
When you write a book, if you publish or self-publish, publisher or self-publish, which we have done both, you're very limited on documents, you're very limited on pages, and this is a vast story, and there's no way we could ever cover it in a book. And that's why we have two books. It's not, and you almost have to repeat a little bit so you can catch people back up, but each time we've done a book, we've learned more, and then now we know what we feel is as much as we, of the story. And so what we look to do in the next book is tell the comprehensive story, things that have never been told before, witnesses, people, their lives, lots of good information, but tell the complete story almost in a flow chart, and then our timeline, and then follow up with the documentation in the second portion. So it'll be a different type of book, but we feel like this will be our contribution to, as you said, a very, very important part of history, sharing it.
Yeah, just the documentation alone, I think it should be enough. Besides eyewitnesses, and you do have audio recordings. Now, when this UFO either crash landed or what have you, was there smoke? Was there an explosion? What was that event like from the point of view of the eyewitnesses?
Well, the reason the oil field workers were called out to begin with was not to go and check on a downed flying saucer.
Mm-hmm.
It was the fact they were called out there because there was a brush fire on top of a mesa. And at the base of the mesa, which we have pictures in our book, that was the old oil storage facility. Lots of nasty things, butyls and butanes and things, all the byproducts of the gas field. So they went out there to see if the fire was any threat to the tanks, which it turned out it wasn't. When the oil field workers went up on the mesa to kind of take an assessment of the fire is when they found the craft.
And I might add too, when you earlier had mentioned that there was a goat farmer that went out to let his goats into the pen, that was what you described when you were telling the initial story. As Mr. Archuleta went out to his goat pen, he was the first civilian to see, and this particular craft, because they had been seen for months all over in that area, but and it hit a bluff and scraped it. And so you're asking if there was smoke or there was anything. Right. And when it scraped, there were actually sparks. So we know that was not sandstone, which is prevalent in that area. It was the metal actually scraped
volcanic rock.
Mm-hmm. Okay, now is this the mesa where it crashed?
Yes, that's the eastern side of the mesa. Mm-hmm. The actual crash site is a little bit to the right of that.
And behind.
Yeah, and behind.
Okay. All right. So for everyone listening, if you want to see these images, you can go to youtube.com/paranormalpop as we go along. Right. So okay. So if it had sparks and if it was sandstone, it must have been a soft bump because sandstone is not the strongest rock out there.
What we're saying is it wasn't sandstone. There's sandstone all around, but it scraped along an area that there were sparks. So it had to have been volcanic rock.
Gotcha. Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah. We took a picture of the scrape mark it made on the mesa. It's in the book.
Yeah. Yeah. I like this book because you do give us plenty to look at, right when it's important. And, like I was alluding to before, images really help.
Mm-hmm.
It just makes something real for people. Okay, so this craft hits volcanic rock. Now the oil workers see it. They pursue this.
Mm-hmm.
It's landed. It's landed on the mesa. Mesa, if you're not familiar, it's a top of a hill, like a table top is why they call it mesa.
The oil field workers had no idea, the ones we interviewed, that it was anything extraterrestrial.
Mm-hmm.
They figured it was some type of U.S. prototype or some kind of top secret new jet form. It wasn't until they saw the bodies that they thought that something must be quite different about this. So they were on the craft trying to find a way to get in to see if anybody in there was injured.
A rescue.
Right. So when they get up there, are they the first on the scene, or have others already arrived?
Everybody's arriving. Ranchers, the Mr. and Mrs. Knight, which we never did get to interview, they had passed even before I got interested in the case. They leased land out there. They were there. They were senior adults.
Mm-hmm.
Young oil field workers that were 19, 20, at the time that it happened. 2 police officers showed up and a Baptist minister. We never interviewed the Baptist minister. He was long past, but we did have many interviews with his son, who's also a Baptist minister, by the way.
There was a sheriff deputy. There was a county commissioner. What else do we have?
A cast of thousands.
Yeah, there were quite a few people there.
Yeah. And right. So then you also had later a couple of what we think might be army or some sort of military personnel, and no one has determined, right, what force they were from.
No.
Okay.
Ken Farley had been in a very short stint in the Navy based in San Diego.
Mm-hmm.
And he said they had they had no markings at all, whether they were Air Force, Army. The Air Force was relatively brand new at that point.
Yeah.
They were older men, more mature men. They weren't young like the oil field workers.
Mm-hmm.
Seasoned is what he said. They seemed seasoned.
And before they showed up, people started poking around. So can you tell us what happened?
As they were trying to get in the craft, they were taking fire poles off the oil field trucks. Keep in mind, back then and today, if you're out on an oil rig, whether it be gas or crude oil, you are not only the operator and responsible for the maintenance of that oil rig, but also if there's a fire breaks out, it's probably you and your firefighting equipment. That's it. You're not going to get fire equipment out there from the town of AZTEC. So they were poking around the craft with fire poles using the hole in the porthole window.
Mm-hmm.
They activated basically a staircase that came down, and they were able to look up inside the craft. And Doug Nolan told us the most amazing thing is they're poking around this craft. And the other amazing thing is, for the first time, most of them saw a helicopter for the first time. A helicopter showed up at the scene as though it had been tracking the errant object and hovered for just a few minutes and took off to the northeast.
And that we suspect would be in Denver, right?
I don't think it would have the range to go from Denver to AZTEC and back to Denver.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Colorado. But
yeah, it went somewhere in Colorado, going to the northeast. But they had a range of about 168 to 170 miles, so they didn't. That thing didn't travel too far.
Yeah, well, this was the first incarnation, right, of a military helicopter.
They had just gone into service in January of '48.
Right. So that would be an odd thing anyway. I mean, that would throw someone for a loop, I think.
Yeah.
They didn't know which was more amazing to them. Now, today, surely we would think the saucer or the craft, but because they had not seen a helicopter, it was amazing to them.
Okay, so could you tell us about the Farmington event? Because it's just like, as I was speaking to before, it's just so odd that like all of these UFOs. I mean, I understand why they would be curious about us, right, with the Manhattan Project and all of the Los Alamos and all the Sandia, all these things going on. It's very exciting. See what crazy humans are doing, but why were they seemingly so open at times?
Well, the 1950 March 17th UFO Armada over Farmington, almost 2 years to the date. Crash was March 25th, 1948. The Armada was March 17th. Actually lasted for like 2.5 days. You need to get Dave Marler on your show. He's really dug into that a lot. Do you know Dave?
I don't know Dave, no.
Okay. Contact me privately. I'll give you his information.
Sure.
I think he's in the process of writing a book on it, not to put words in his mouth. But hundreds, it started at dozens, and then it was hundreds of flying saucers were seen over the town of Farmington, even AZTEC, and over to Las Vegas, New Mexico. So they kind of came down, did a big loop into New Mexico, and then right back out. But they, it was almost like a show of strength. I don't know. I wish I would have seen it. But the town, it made the headlines. And a lot of very credible people, and some that are still alive today, witnessed it.
And when it made the headlines, but it didn't go national, did it?
I think it went as far as California and maybe to Chicago.
Okay, all right. So because when Roswell hit, that it went wide very quickly.
Yeah,
but then it was retracted very quickly as well.
Yeah, the next day.
So perhaps because of that, any sort of quote unquote breaking UFO news, at that point, people were like, I don't know. Last time it was, it wasn't real. It was a misunderstanding. So are there any cases of misunderstanding here? Right? Because Roswell, they try to explain it with Project Mogul, which makes no sense chronologically. But, the weather balloon was at the time the excuse. What was there even a need for that with the AZTEC incident to come up with an alternative story?
No, I think they went about it differently, as Suzanne was saying earlier. I mean, they grabbed the two guys that were leaking the story to Frank Scully and set them up in a bogus case.
Mm-hmm.
Got to keep in mind they were operating in Colorado, Utah, Arizona, California, New Mexico. When they tried to get them arrested, not one judge in any of those states would touch it. This is a civil matter. And what it was an investor in one of Silas Newton's gadgets complained that he invested money and it wasn't working out. All the judges, and we could have a 5-hour show on that whole deal, and I won't worry.
The court. Yeah.
But the judges all looked at it and said it's laughable. And it was a magistrate, finally, a local magistrate in one of the small towns that said, yeah, I'll issue a citation to bring him in.
Mm-hmm.
And unprecedented.
Well, we'll cover that more when we get back on the other side of this break. Because I think people need to understand who J.P. Kahn is and how he played into the Frank Scully story, which leads into the this hoax that you have come to see it as. And I think that the court documents alone, like you said, it's almost laughable. But the aggression there from J.P. Kahn towards Frank Scully and Silas Newton is just horrifying. So, because it does hurt people's livelihoods as well. It goes beyond just covering up a story, so it gets very personal, which is uncool. So this is Alan B. Smith for Paranormal Now on KGRA Radio. We will come right back after this break with the Ramseys. This story is still getting warmed up. We have another hour to go. We'll be right back.
Folks, this is very important information. What's to be said about CBD? AncientLifeOil.com. Our CBD is made from hemp and has 0.003 THC, which means this wonderful product won't get you high, no matter what amount you take. What does CBD do for the body? My hands are tied, but you can Google CBD benefits and be astounded. When you're finished reading, you'll want to log on to AncientLifeOil.com. That's AncientLifeOil.com and purchase. Life is good when you feel good. People are tired of pain. People are asking for non-GMO organic products to help them with you fill in the blank. Legal in 49 states. And again, our CBD is made from hemp. Ancient Life Oil is about helping people one by one by one. If you wonder how good the product is, the CEO takes it every day without miss. AncientLifeOil.com. That's AncientLifeOil.com. Have a great day.
Hey, this check is wrong. I worked a holiday and 7 hours of overtime. Not getting paid correctly is a real pain. It could also hurt our boss if our company provides out-of-compliance checks. That's right. Construction companies doing business with the government can get fined, or officials of the companies can go to jail if the checks aren't right. It's a law. The Davis-Bacon Act has 30 compliance issues for every check, but there is an easy way for construction companies to be in compliance. EMARS offers Compliant Client, a web-based system that finds and corrects all 30 of the possible out-of-compliance check issues. Users of Compliant Client report an 80% savings in time and money. Running a weekly payroll usually takes about 5 minutes. All 15,000 plus clients of EMARS have never had a legal compliance issue. Plus, they sleep better on check day. Contact EMARS at emarsinc.com or call 480-595-0466.
Every 2 seconds, someone needs blood. Whether it's a natural disaster or one single child suffering from illness, the American Red Cross stands ready to supply blood when it's most needed. But blood is a perishable product. Therefore, it must continuously be replenished. You can safely donate blood every 56 days. The need is constant and patients are waiting. Call your American Red Cross at 1-800-GIVE-LIFE to schedule your life-saving appointment. Please give blood today. Patients are depending on you.
So you love talk radio? Then you'll love TalkStreamLive.com. TalkStream Live is always on, 24/7 with the best streaming talk shows. Find your favorite talkers and discover some new ones. It's free, readily available online or on mobile with any smartphone or tablet. Finding your favorite talk shows all in one place has gotten a whole lot easier. Just go to TalkStreamLive.com. Be sure to download the free apps from Google Play or the iTunes App Store.
Now you have the inside contact for alternative talk radio. The Planet. KGRARadio.com.
Welcome back to Paranormal Now. This is Alan B. Smith, your grateful host, taking us out of the break once again with Septembrio. I love their music. They're so good. They are paranormally inspired, as we are here on Paranormal Now. And we've had that discussion many a times, the how broad the term paranormal is, and if anything really is paranormal. I just growing up, I've always sort of clumped ufology into the paranormal realm. And, because what was once supernatural becomes natural. I mean, with the progression of science, that's what we have in our worldview right now. And is it so hard? Is it so hard to believe that extraterrestrials are visiting this planet, and that maybe they goofed up a couple of times and landed on a ranch floor and a mesa? I don't know. My personal opinion after reading Scott and Suzanne's book is that yes, something indeed happened, and the chances of it being a crashed extraterrestrial craft are very, very high. It's hard. It's hard because even Roswell, I've been a believer of that for a long time. Even for those of us who we look at the evidence, it makes sense. It could hold up in court. And yet, when you don't see something, when you don't have a UFO in the palm of your hands, it's a little challenging to one's paradigm, to accepting reality as it is. It's no different than someone makes you a job offer, but it's not real until you sign the contract. So it has that kind of feeling for me often. What about you, Scott and Suzanne? How do you process all these strange things that come with ufology?
I guess that's why you don't see us at a lot of UFO conferences over the years. They certainly process it differently, that's for sure. I think Suzanne and Dr. Thayer and I and the other people that give us a tremendous amount of help, the ones I mentioned earlier, we're kind of document junkies.
Mm-hmm.
Interviews are great with people, but if you're interviewing them, like when the second book came out, a gentleman, we get a lot of our leads from people that read the book and then contact us. And in this case, the gentleman contacted us because his daughter read the book and said, you need to talk to him. And I kind of like a paper trail. If somebody says they work somewhere, I like to see tax records in that town, school records that their kid went to school there, documentation that Suzanne and I can dig up on their employment, where they worked. Because everybody has a limited memory. I mean, mine's Probably not as good as it was 10 years ago.
Mhm.
When you're interviewing somebody in their 90s about something that happened 70 years ago, there's a lot to be left around. There's a lot to be taken for granted.
If I can say too, that in terms of, I think one of the things Scott's describing is credible witnesses and credible information. And if you base your research strictly on the internet or on what someone tells you, that's all well and good. But with the internet, you don't have to even say your real name. Anybody can put anything down. I mean, look at Wikipedia. That's a classic example there. It's constantly being changed. So I guess what we have tried to do is it's boots on the ground. And if we can't document it, we don't put it in the book, period. There are a lot of additional information, but we just don't put it out because if we can't document it, it doesn't exist. And I feel like when people say, well, don't you think about other worlds and things? And of course we do. Those are magical. But if you're trying to persuade or help someone understand or document something, that's not the way to do it.
I don't know. I think a lot of people would disagree with you. And, because this whole idea that UFOs could potentially be interdimensional, right? Quantum physics supports that theoretically, that beings maybe could come from another dimension. So the idea of what a UFO is, who the extraterrestrial are, is like it's broadening, it's widening. And that's led to what I think you're probably trying to avoid is really out there speculation. And other people are saying, well, you know what, let's just embrace it. Let's just embrace it. Whichever way it falls, that's how it will present the information. But you really think that being holding your cards close and sticking to the data is the best approach.
That's one way, and it's one way to have a solid foundation so that we can look at all these other things. There is a certain, if you're trying to get good information out to people and teach people and help people to understand, giving them a theory is one thing, but as you said yourself, showing them something, seeing something, touching something helps a lot. And so our little niche, our specialty niche is showing concrete, no pun intended, evidence that this at least took place. What you do with it from there is another whole story. But they exist.
Yeah, I don't know if you're familiar with Bruce Fenton, but he is a perfect example. He's been on the show many times, and he and Danny had written, a couple of books on their theories about extraterrestrials, consciousness, the history, alternative theories. And then later, Bruce decided to go down the road of looking at our ancestral history and looking at paleontology, anthropology, and human evolution. And he came to the conclusion that he thinks that humans, as we know, left Africa, went over to Asia and Australia, and actually evolved further there, closer to humans as we are now, and then moved back into Africa. And it challenges the mainstay theory, right, of evolution. And he was trying to get, and he did some really good work. I mean, Graham Hancock has backed him as well. I mean, it's really, really interesting stuff. But nobody wants to listen to him because he's the ET guy. And it's a shame because he really makes a great case. It's fascinating, and as we all know, that what evolution is expanding. We're not this linear evolution. It's branching off. It's complicated. So now's the perfect time. Yeah, let's listen to what Bruce has to say. But nope, can't touch it because he's talking about aliens.
Tell you what, when people approach us and they hear that we've written a book, whether it's Scott or I, Scott does a beautiful job of explaining it. But I always find myself, if somebody comes up to me and says, "What's your book about?" I don't say a UFO right off. I really don't.
Yeah.
I'll say a historical documentation of an event in New Mexico. If I have a few minutes with them, then I can explain it to them, because people are very polarized. Either they believe or, oh, you're crazy, one extreme or the other. And in order to give them a good center, and then let them make the decision. You know, we just handle it differently. You know, that's just our way.
I got a message from my father, and he makes a really good point. You know, maybe if you get a movie made, hey, maybe Spielberg will want to do one more Last Alien movie. I don't know, but that kind of pop attention, you know, it catches with people. What do you guys feel about that?
Well, with the new book that we're working on will be the next step after that, because it will tell the complete story, and then it's very easy to go from there.
Now, privately, do you speak more speculatively about different aspects of who ET are, what they might be?
Yeah. Well, we both have our own
our feelings.
Feelings.
Yeah. So you're not shutting it out completely. You're just saying.
Not at all.
Oh,
No,
not at
we're
all.
not shutting it out at all. I think, you know, we have our own opinions, and I think it's part of the reason that we feel so strongly that there's no reason to embellish this. We have people, TV shows, some movies. We've had different people approach us on a regular basis to embellish this incident, and it is an amazing incident in itself, in its purity. You really don't need to embellish it. It really dilutes it if you do that. And so we don't discount it at all. It's very exciting to us, but you have to pick your niche. And what is it that you feel, and what are you called to do? And I really feel like Scott and I were brought together to do this.
I mean, honestly, yeah. Especially knowing your story. Yeah.
Who would be crazy enough for 16 plus years? You know, up until this last year, we've taken off because we've really been working hard on the farm. But up until this point, all but 2 days of our honeymoon, we have worked on this case. So, and nobody's crazy enough to do that. Their own money, you got nothing to show for it. You know, it's you know, except that you have a satisfaction that you can share some good information.
Well, speaking of that, you spent over $500,000. Am I correct in your research over how many years? 30 plus?
Yeah, actually, it's about what friends of ours spend on their boat at the lake every summer. You know? So I mean, when you break it over 30 some years, it's really not that bad.
But that's commitment. If you took that 500,000 over 30 years and bits and pieces and invested it in mutual funds and stocks, I mean, you know, you have a passion for this, and that's a commitment to do that. Why would you do that? Why not be more of an armchair researcher, and wait maybe, you know, until you're older and you've saved up some money and then look into it? Why did you start way back when? Well, not way back when, but way back when.
Stanton Friedman taught me a long time ago. He said, "Hey, you better get going because we're always chasing the Undertaker."
Right. True.
Very, very correct on that.
Yep.
I mean, a lot of people. Just tell you a real quick Reader's Digest version. We were looking for a scientist in New Mexico, myself and another guy, and I'd take vacation time and go out, fly out, get a rental car, go to this town, and he'd go one way every day. I'd go the other, and we'd meet at a hotel every day about 4 o'clock and have a cold beer and discuss our failure for the day. And one day, a year later, the bartender recognizes we're back there trying to find, because this scientist allegedly worked on the AZTEC crash.
Okay.
And the bartender said, "Who are you looking for? You know, this must be really important." And I gave him the guy's name. He said, "Oh, he's dead." I said, "How do you know that?" He said, "He used to be sitting here every day when you guys would come in watching TV. He'd watch some kind of business report.
Right at the same
at the same bar in the same hotel."
Oh my gosh.
And here we talked to every senior person in that town that we could find, but we never walked down to the end of the bar and said, "Hey, you don't happen to be so-and-so, are you?"
Yeah. Well, having been a bartender in the past, it's a great place for information. So
absolutely. Yeah.
For any future researchers, go to the local bars, man. You know?
That was a lesson learned.
Yeah, that's a lesson that we will never forget.
But I often ask myself that question too. Why is it that we keep on going, and just when we think, all right, we're done, and then by golly, we're back in it again. And believe me, it has been considerable time, money, resources. It's a lot. It really is a lot for us. But for some reason, it's just inside of us, and it's just we're drawn to it. And then you get another little nugget, and it's like a treasure hunt. And you think, okay, now I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this. It just blossoms. And we have been so fortunate, even though this case is many years ago, to keep finding new clues. And they're not funky trails that take you off, in the bad direction. A lot of times they're right on the mark, and they, only support information that we've already found. So if you have that type of inspiration, it's easy to keep going.
Right. Inspiration and dedication.
Mm-hmm.
And dedication, I guess.
You mentioned armchair researchers. I think the problem with the UFO community is they have too many. We don't have enough boots on the ground. We have a bunch of people who do internet searches, and that's how they do their research. I'm not saying everybody, of course, but we have too many of the ones we have that are doing it. You mentioned earlier, nothing like holding something in your hand or seeing a picture or going out to a crash site, looking at the physical evidence that we missed over the years. The case when we took Ted Phillips out there, we were out there a better part of a day, and at the end he said, I hate to tell you, there's been a lot of physical evidence that you've been walking past all these years. Ted went from rather skeptical on AZTEC to very much saying, of course something happened here.
Yeah.
As many other UFO researchers have.
Right. So let's, as promised, talk about JP Kahn.
Okay.
And so what was the relationship between Frank Scully before publishing his book and JP Kahn? And then let's go through into the trial.
Okay. JP Kahn, I'll do half and I'll let Suzanne finish the other half. JP Kahn worked for the San Francisco Chronicle on and off. He was a very good writer. I read some of the things he wrote. A lot of the things that he had a passion for were old Western stories. And he wrote them under a pen name, and right this second, I can't think of the pen name that he wrote them under. He and Scott Newell was second in command at the newspaper. They got wind of Scully's book. And JP Kahn said, we're going to buy the story from Frank Scully. This is a huge story. We're going to buy the story and run it in the San Francisco Chronicle. They approached Scully. Of course, everybody has their own view of what happened here. They approached Scully with an offer to buy it. Scully was already pretty knee-deep into writing Behind the Flying Saucers, the book on AZTEC. Told JP Kahn, it's not for sale. I'm already negotiating with the publishing company, which he was at that time, Henry Hoyt and Company. I guess JP had kind of convinced Scott Newell that the story was in the bag, that he was going to be able to buy it from Frank.
Sure.
That didn't happen. He had some dirt on his face. Frank went on to publish the book.
Wait, so just interrupt you real quick, Scott. So when you say dirt on his face, Kahn was offended that Frank wouldn't let him run with the story.
After he told Scott that, hey, we got the story, it's in the bag.
Okay.
And I get this by flying out to California and interviewing a gentleman that worked with JP Kahn back in actually a few years after it all happened.
Mm-hmm.
JP then felt that he had been let down. Of course, Frank Scully's version of it is, we never negotiated a deal. I told him it's not for sale, period, end of report. JP got upset, contacted J. Edgar Hoover, wrote him a letter, we have copies of it, and said, boy, you got to look into this. I think this is all just a bunch of fraud.
And San Francisco Chronicle was pretty respectable at the time. So
right, yeah. When you look at all the writers they had back then, I mean, they were very, very, first name writers. Even Dear Abby, I believe, came out of there, didn't she?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And J.P. Kahn took it or J. Edgar Hoover took it very serious and got the FBI going on to do an investigation from their end. But if you read all the letters and all the documents, their interest was more who is giving Scully the information, more so than the secondary part of it. The J.P. Kahn was interested in going after. But anyway, it started the ball rolling. And it cost Frank Scully credibility. I believe that really hurt him. And it got Silas Newton and Leo Gabauer into trouble. They never did any jail time or anything like that, but it took a lot of time away from them. And at the end, Silas Newton wrote an $18,000 check to cover the court cost. So it put a black eye on the entire AZTEC story.
Well, how maybe Suzanne, maybe you can speak to this. How did it get to this level of a whole? Like, what happened with the court? I mean, look, writing a letter and saying, "Oh, I don't know about these guys," is one thing, but to get this to a trial, where it would, like you said, it would be a civil dispute kind of issue.
Right.
How did that happen? How did that go so far?
I might just add here, and I want to step back, and Scott can comment on that. I think we forget that J.P. Kahn came from a very wealthy family. He never had to work a day in his life. He inherited a great amount of money, and from people that we interviewed, and based on who he was as a person, was kind of a braggart person and challenging to be around sometimes. And I think the fact that his nose was so snubbed, it really inspired him to go out and discredit and to, it's the old story of build myself up to tear somebody else down, tear somebody else down to build myself up. That's more or less what he was doing. And he went to great measures and had the time and the money to do it. Rarely would you know someone of those means.
So yeah, if he was a a professional reporter, working their butt off trying to get the next story, and they're doing 60+ hour weeks, they wouldn't have time. They'd be like, this is a bummer, it doesn't look good, but I've got to move on to the next thing. But Kahn, like he really went in on them, and he
went full throttle. It was incredible.
So what was the accusation against Silas Newton? Silas Newton, who gave the AZTEC story to Frank Scully.
I'm sorry, say that one more time.
So what was the actual accusation of Silas Newton?
They finally dragged him into court over. Ironically, it was taking a check from an investor and crossing a state line with it with the intent to deposit it in the bank.
But what did he contact Hoover with?
Oh, what did he contact Hoover with? That there was at least one disgruntled investor by the name of Herman Flater from Denver. He talked Silas Newton and put into having Silas invest $250,000 into a health machine that Flater and his son developed. And in turn, Silas said, well, you need to invest some money in our project, which is making a doodle bug. A doodle bug is an instrument that finds oil and water and anything you want it to find under the ground. It's nicknamed a doodle bug. When Herman Flater gave him the check and complained later, well, actually, J.P. Kahn sat Flater down and said, you're dealing with a bunch of con men. And
so he went after Flater. He was pushing him.
Yeah, he was lighting a big fire under Flater that, hey, I need your help on this. And when the magistrate finally said, okay, well, we'll drag him in and find out what's going on, it was the charge of taking an investor's check across state line for the purpose of depositing it in the bank. That would never fly today.
Sure. Okay, so now they're taking to trial. There are witnesses. So Silas Newton, basically what he did was that he he looked for oil or water if it was a farmer or rancher, but really he made his millions off of oil.
Right.
And what he would do is get like a nest of investment. So 10,000 from this person, however much from this person. He would use that money, look for an oil field, find it or not. But if he found it, everybody made money and everybody was happy. The majority of the time, this went well for him. Flater was one of those exceptions. But was it really? Did Flater actually lose money in that investment?
Don't know. You can't really find that in any of the court records. I think Newton probably paid him back, although I don't know that. I'm speculating because Flater went off into the sunset very quietly.
Yeah.
There was a big lawsuit after that. Getting records on that is very difficult too. One of the cases was thrown out of court in Denver, but then there's another lawsuit that popped up, and that was between True Magazine and a whole bunch of the people that kind of went against Frank Scully and Silas Newton. I do want to put in, during 1948, Silas Newton had a net worth of $25 million, a liquid net worth.
That was huge back then.
I mean, it's a lot of money today, but back then that would be just unbelievable.
Yep.
I think it was just the whole thing to just discredit Frank Scully and his book.
Okay, so Frank Flater.
Herman Flater.
Thank you. I'll just say Flater. Is charging in court, right? Okay, so did they bring any witnesses for the prosecution to support this claim that he was bamboozled by?
Actually, the boring court cases or the court transcripts. Silas Newton's attorney wanted to bring in all the investors that were investing in oil wells, which I think part of Flater's money did go into an oil well.
Mm-hmm.
And they were talking about how much money they were receiving in royalties every month. Right. And the judge wouldn't allow it.
And also on the defense side,
3 of them, by the way. I'm sorry.
Okay. And on the defense side, they did bring witnesses that were like, no, we like Silas, right? We made money off these investments. And there were multiple more that, for whatever reason, I think was the judge that decided that they can't.
Judge and Flater's attorney and the prosecutor.
It's so odd.
Yeah.
That they would. So this plays out, and then in the court, the prosecutor presents an alternative doodlebug. in the age of alternative facts, the alternative doodlebug, right? It's not the actual doodlebug that Silas had, which was probably something more proprietary because it came out of his time in the military, right? I mean, this is a technology that.
Well, that is a good debatable thing. I don't know where it came from. Some of the tongue-in-cheek promoting of it was it came from alien technology. Wink, wink. We've got the best doodlebug because ours is made with alien technology.
Right.
The one that they showed in court, the prosecution, was an Army surplus piece of equipment that had nothing to do with the doodlebug, didn't even resemble it. I think somewhere in our book we have a picture of the actual doodlebug.
Right. And the defense attorney said this is not the real deal, but the judge admitted it anyway, even though it was literally not the doodlebug. It just looked like it or was similar.
Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is all just ugly.
Twice. I mean, it was worth like $2.
And so what happened? What happened to Silas Newton at the end of this trial?
Nothing. The judge made him pay the court cost. He wrote a check for $18,000 for a year and a half or whatever, and they all went out to dinner.
So was he charged?
No.
So
not criminally. I mean, he was charged with you pissed off an investor. I guess that was really the charge.
Okay. So it was theater. It was really theater.
It was get everybody's mind off the whole AZTEC thing.
Yeah, and so for everybody listening, if you Google this, if you get the Ramsey's book, and you read, you will understand the court documents. That's one of the most important thing about ufology are documents, right? FOIA documents, court documents, whatever you can find that has a government stamp on it saying this happened. It's a big deal. And you guys have done a lot of that work. What other documents do you think are other smoking guns in this case that you found?
I'll start and I'll have Suzanne finish. I like the sting operation they did at the Edelweiss Bar in downtown Denver, trying to apprehend a person selling pictures of the AZTEC crash listed right in the document to a reporter from the Baltimore paper. And this involved counterintelligence from the Army, FBI, Air Force, and I believe one of the documents even covered the Army Counterintelligence Division out of Fort Belvoir, Maryland. That's a lot of resources to go after buying pictures of the flying saucer.
Right. Okay. And then the interesting thing about that too is that there might have actually been two government agencies a part of this sting. So one side is what was the FBI that you thought?
FBI, CIA, Army counterintelligence.
So this is odd. Why? Yeah, that really is interesting. Why would the government be so interested in alleged pictures of the AZTEC crash, which apparently never happened?
Exactly.
Exactly.
How much time and energy would you put on something that didn't exist?
Right. And money.
And the reporter, it turns out, never worked for the Baltimore Sun or the Baltimore Sun-Times.
Okay.
We went all the way back to the boss of all the reporters back then, who's retired and living down on the Jersey Shore, and he said, I would have never okayed a reporter to leave here and fly to Denver with $2,500 cash to buy pictures. I don't care what the pictures were, that would never happen. And then we went with the HR department, and there was never a reporter with that name that worked there. So I think you had more than one or two or three or four government entities. You could have had one that was there to buy the pictures, posing as a reporter to get the pictures off the market.
Right. Okay, so we are going to open up the phone line. So if you have questions for Scott and Suzanne, call the hotline, the Paranormal Radio app hotline. That's 85-KGRA Live, 855-472-5483 for the Paranormal Radio app hotline. Okay, so I have a question here from the comments section. And so we're going to go off a little bit in a different direction. This is from Carl Brooks. He says, may I ask what type of beings were seen, if any, were still alive? Did they try to communicate either verbally or telepathically? Apologies for the any ignorance.
Take that one.
It's not ignorance. It's a complex story, and you can't know everything. That's why you're listening, and we're happy to share the information. You'll hear people refer to either 14 or 16 bodies, and it all depends on who you talk to at the time of how many they had outside of the craft. So 16 is the number, the final number.
Okay.
Initially, they saw 2 bodies when the oil field workers were poking around and looking inside. But it ended up 16 total bodies. They were between 3 and 4 feet tall. They had very childlike features and a blue, almost like jumpsuit on, and perfect teeth. Am I missing something? That their bodies charred, almost like burned.
It's like a decompression, like we were talking earlier, like there's a massive decompression.
Right. Oh, and you say perfect teeth. What does that mean?
I don't know. That was just the way they were described.
That was described.
Now, because I'm just trying to think off the top of my head. I mean, it's not usual in reports that you hear people referring specifically to teeth.
No.
You know, because they would describe humanoid bodies, but not necessarily pick out teeth. Now, you know, if these were organic beings, and you know, unfortunately, they had died tragically in a crash. You know, maybe their mouths were open, and I don't know. I can't imagine what that scene would be like. I don't remember anything very graphic in the descriptions of the scene, like as in blood or gore. It just seemed like the pressure and the impact alone might have caused their deaths.
Right.
We can say, though, the minister that said prayers over their body happened to be coming along, a Baptist minister, and asked
is there a way that I can help? And the military said, come on over, we'd like you to see this, and if you could say some prayers. Well, you can imagine him seeing the bodies there. He literally went back to his parishioners and cried. It was so upsetting to him. It wasn't that he said for him that it shook his faith, or it was actually the fact of, that there was such a thing. It was seeing them dead, and just, it was just incredibly sad to hear. And in terms of, I think Carl also asked if they were telepathic. We have no way of knowing that, but I think there was something that's real significant that we found from where the craft hit the side of that bluff and scraped the bluff. From there on, it went due north, absolute due north. So it's interesting that rarely something like that would happen. Do you want to comment on that?
No, I think you covered it well, but Valentin Archuleta called the Air Force that night and reported that, hey, those crazy flying saucers that you guys are talking about, one just hit a bluff near my ranch, and they asked him which direction it was going, and he said it was going north toward Hart Canyon. But when you get out a map and you a USGS map and you look at where the crash site is and where his ranch is, that thing flew perfect north.
The reason I bring that up when the question came up with telepathically, it would indicate, this is speculation, but it would indicate that either it was on a setting to take it due north, or the occupants were still able to negotiate it that way.
Okay. So Roswell happened about 9 months earlier. We assume they're trying to back engineer this thing already. Now, do you think that you I think were alluding to it earlier, that maybe some tech from that crash was already being understood or disseminated?
The gentleman that came forward and claimed that he worked on it at Wright-Patterson, he was there until 57, I believe. I'd have to look at my notes. When he left, they were no closer in how the thing operated than when it was brought in 9 years earlier.
It's our understanding through the research that actually at the crash site itself, that there were 9 scientists that were brought in and worked on the craft there. Then they were taken to different pieces of it were taken different places. And so there have been many, many scientists that have worked on it after that point.
Many scientists? I mean, how many do you think?
It would be hard to say, but I mean, it has gone, pieces of it have gone different places. And as Scott said, up until what year, they were still, one part of it, they were still working on, had not really made much progress. So.
Right. Because compartmentalizing is essential, right? You can't keep a secret like this unless it's compartmentalized. Do you believe Philip Corso that he was involved with disseminating technology from the Roswell crash?
It's been a long time since I read his book the day after Roswell. He talks, I'm from Pittsburgh originally, and so is he. He worked for Gulf Oil in his later years and sat on the board. He's a credible guy. I don't have a reason to say he's made the whole thing up.
Well, because I think that it's interesting, right? Well, even in the 90s, I think it came out like 97, something like that. When you're talking about fiber optics, it sounds like super fascinating, right? It's like, oh my gosh, high tech. But now it's like, it's really not that high tech. Now we're Bluetoothing, we're Wi-Fi, right? So, when we hear about these technologies that were reverse engineered and fed into the corporate system, it makes it more difficult to believe. But then again, maybe this civilization is only 100 years ahead of us. And that's just enough for them to transverse the stars and check out these crazy beings over here.
I'm going to excuse myself for a second, let our dog out. But Scott,
Sure.
you might want to comment on some of the technology on the craft. And that might be
the oil field workers that we interviewed. Now, let's take Doug Nolan. When we interviewed him, we didn't have flat screen computers yet, but he was describing the inside of the craft. And years later, when we have flat screen TV or computers like I'm talking to you on, that's kind of what he was describing when they looked in what they call the upper deck, where the first two beings were found. A lot of things that would have been really far, and I think that's where Frank Scully had his problem when the book came out in 50. He was talking about technologies that the average person in 1950 is going to be reading going, what are you talking about?
CDs.
Yeah, CDs type things. The fact that the scientists sank several ships in one day using a specific piece of technology. Well, that's a common piece of technology used every day now, especially in oil field research. So I could see in 1950 people reading that and saying, wow, that's pretty far out. And then interviewing Doug Nolan years later and going, that sounds pretty far out. That civilization could have been 50 years ahead of us. They could have been 1,000 years ahead of us.
Right.
Think what 50 years on this planet is going to be like.
But something that is really, I think, interesting and unique is of the 9 scientists that these are world-class scientists that worked on the craft on location. Several of them went on to create GSI, which turned into Texas Instruments.
Right.
Now, that's significant because if you look at the computer and how much it changed and what Texas Instruments did,
Silas Newton was rubbing shoulders with the smartest among us.
Oh yeah.
Right. And so, but it is, I think it's difficult for me. I accept it, but it's difficult to accept that, especially after the Roswell crash, that 9 scientists in total would be willing to share information, even if it was funneled through 1 or 2. It's like, well, what happened to loyalty to your, an honor for your country, and all those things, because that was a World War II era, and keeping secrets was something respectable at the time.
If I can make a comment on that, Scott and I took a trip to Minnesota, to the University of Minnesota, and one of the scientists that was one of the head scientists on that team, Dr. Torrance Tate, we did some research on him, and when you go into these archives at the university, they have carts of information that are many stories down. And you actually know, no one has been there for years. No one's seen them. They bring them up, you put on your white gloves and you go through. We're looking for information on Dr. Tate, and we're looking and looking and looking. And after a while, your eyes are about ready to pop out. And what we began to see is a picture of people describing, both of his students as well as his colleagues, of what a quiet man, non-assuming man he is, what a brilliant man he is, but he never wants attention drawn to him, and he never wants to, bang the drum at all. Yeah. And in fact, on papers, he would put his students' names on there and wouldn't even include that he was involved with it. The reason I bring that too is we then find that during the AZTEC incident, he was in the Southwest. He had traveled to the Southwest. And he comes back from this trip and he calls together this conference for people. And he is the lead speaker. And he gets up and tells people, tells everyone there, all of his colleagues, I am thrilled to tell you that I have just come back from doing some research and now understand
that we have the capability to feed everyone. Fuel is no problem. Energy is no problem.
Yeah.
And that although I have spent my entire life working with war issues, in terms of what's the term I want to use? I've worked in the war effort. I now want to spend every day of my life philanthropically, and I want us to be able to use this information. So when you ask that question, why would they spill the beans on this? He felt that passionate about it.
Yeah.
He could see the difference that it could make. And so, there again, that's one of those pieces of the puzzle that if you don't know that, it doesn't really make sense. But I can tell you, us sitting there in that archive, we both had chills. It was just very, very exciting.
I think these scientists were also concerned, to your point, we just came off World War II, that the technology would be used for weaponizing us and not for the good of man.
Right. Exactly. And he was, winding down in his career. And when he saw this, Tate, it reinvigorated him. I think was maybe the word that you used, something like that in the book. And it gave him purpose. In a way he had not had before. And what could that be? A weather balloon, a helicopter landing? No,
especially for me.
Right? Yeah, no, even back then, no, I don't think it would.
Not even back then.
Yeah. So for everybody listening, this is your last chance. The clock is ticking to call in and ask your questions of Suzanne and Scott Ramsey, the foremost researchers on this. So there is no one better to pose your questions to and to speak with. So consider this a historical moment and opportunity.
Music or something, shouldn't there?
Yeah. We should.
I also just wanted to tell your listening audience, Bill Steinman wrote the second book on the AZTEC UFO. And Bill has worked with us for years. Typical, he writes a book, and for the next 10 years, people contact him saying, I know something about it, or you need to talk to so-and-so. And he gave us a lot of information that will be in the new book. But sadly, he died a year ago, January, of massive heart attack. But he was a very, very good researcher and really dug into AZTEC very deeply.
Yeah, well, so Steinman published his book in 86, and that was right around the time you started independently researching this. It wasn't because of Steinman's book.
No, I didn't even know about that book until the 90s when somebody bought it for me as a gift.
But I might add, it really was a pleasure. We were able to spend time with Bill, and it took a number of years before he felt comfortable with sharing his information. I mean, you can imagine he was dedicated and wants to make sure that it's placed into good hands. But he became a very good friend of ours, and his plan was to be involved in our final book too.
Yeah, he was going to be part of it.
He's just a remarkable man.
Yeah. See, all this information and access that you had is what makes this fascinating. So, for instance, in Scully's book, he mentions that after Project Saucer was closed, a secret program under a different name continued, correct? But this was before the public had any clue. Before it turned into Project Sign and then eventually Blue Book.
Blue Book, right.
Blue Book, right. Okay. Yeah. So how did he know that? How did he get that inside information that was from Silas Newton?
Well, it was actually from one of the scientists.
Okay.
Yeah.
True. So how did that work? So did he speak personally to all of the scientists, or?
I think he did. Talked to a family member years ago. One of Frank Scully's daughters. And my whole purpose of that conversation was, is Dr. G Leo Gaybauer? And she said, absolutely not. We knew Leo Gaybauer and Silas Newton. They'd come over to the house. This gentleman was tall, very handsome, very, very well dressed. And honestly, she described Jonathan Torrance Tate to a T.
Slender, lanky, kind of lanky.
Yeah. And he died right when Frank Scully's book came out.
Yeah.
I mean,
again, another
Actually, Frank Scully is questioned. Well, how can we talk to the scientists? Will we ever be able to speak to the scientists? One time when he was interviewed, and he said, actually, Dr. G is no longer available. And Tate had just died.
Referencing his death.
And we had mentioned researching and things that you learn. You had access to, I'm dropping the name now, an eyewitness. I think it was Kahn, right? You were told that he was dead by Carl Flock.
Yeah, Carl Flock.
And he wasn't.
No, Carl Flock, by the way, is one of the skeptics of Aztec, and my favorite story. And I like Carl. I mean, unfortunately, Carl has died too. Carl lived about 2.5 hours from Aztec, so he could jump in his car and go to the Aztec crash site anytime he wanted. He never did. The only time he went to the crash site is when he got in our rental car and we took him to the crash site. But I mentioned J.P. Kahn. He said, "Oh, don't waste your time on J.P. Kahn. He died years ago." And when I interviewed Bob McCarley out in California,
he was the illustrator.
Yeah, he had just buried JP. He said, "I was the executor of his estate. If you were out here a year and a half ago, you could have interviewed him."
Man.
So there's a lot of these skeptics and debunkers. You got to be careful. That's why Suzanne and I always say, do your own research.
And another major part of your work, which we just won't have time to cover it all, but it also, Carl and others said that there were not roads available to remove this 100-foot craft,
right,
in diameter. Now, we didn't talk about it earlier, but it did break off into 3 parts.
3 pie-shaped pieces plus 1 center section.
And there was I forget the technical term, but the dragon wagon, which was a truck bed that was big enough and tough enough to carry equipment. It performed in World War II. And so we had the technology to remove this giant thing. But then the other question was, there was a parade, like a children's parade or something on a particular road that day. So they would have seen this thing, and you guys proved that there were other routes that they would not have seen it.
Yeah, it was a Boy Scout jamboree.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a gentleman that was retired. He's ex-Air Force intelligence, by the way. He doesn't like to tell people that unless you pry it out of him. He said, "Well, I know it didn't happen." See, this is when people are in their late 80s and 90s. They have a great memory. He knew it didn't happen because we had a Boy Scout jamboree out just next door to the crash site back in March of '48. So a gentleman helped Suzanne and I, Brooks Marshall, who lives in Aztec, went to the local newspaper, archived all the copies of the newspaper. The Boy Scout Jamboree was May 17th. It lasted Friday, half a day Saturday. It was over. It happened at the entrance of Hart Canyon 2 months later.
Yep.
That's where you can't go on hearsay. And when you said about moving the craft, I can only tell you as Scott's wife, when Scott came to me and said, the one area that we're weak on is moving the craft. And I said, And he said, "We need to reenact that." And I said, "No, we don't." It was a huge
It was a big expense, but we
had to fly out. We had to fly out an expert. We had to reenact it. And, in his wisdom, Scott was absolutely right. We had to do it. But honestly, you just sit back and go, gosh, there's so many other things we could do without money. Yeah. But and it's amazing too. During that same trip, had we not been there, we would not have had aerial pictures over the top that shows where the craft hit and landed, and the trees were moved aside, but that someone had gone in and planted, landscaped, in other words, in straight lines, pinyon trees out there. Well,
yes,
organically plants grow randomly. They're not in a straight line, but there are straight lines. Well, being on the ground, we've seen every angle of that piece of property over and over and over, but you don't see it until you're, in aerial view. So one step sometimes opens up a whole new avenue.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And you went up there, and there is a concrete slab. Where a crane could be placed to lift up these heavy pieces of the craft. Or I guess we don't really know how heavy they actually were. But you did have Art Reed, who was an eyewitness, right? And he
Art was part of the cleanup crew. When Art got there was no craft or anything.
Right. Okay.
They were still there cleaning up a crash site, which Art had done many, many times in the Army Air Corps or later the Air Force, where they would go and look for little pieces of plexiglass and aluminum. And the fact that, Art used to joke, he said, if we had the means, we would have vacuumed, the sand up. But he got there probably, from my estimation, about the second, maybe third week after it happened. He was into April when he got there.
Yeah. So there is so much to this book, and I can't cover everything. I'm just looking at my notes, right? And I have all these questions that we won't have time for. Was there any evidence that anyone's paid off to not share this story?
I would assume some of the ranchers may have been, but I have no proof at all.
No,
but we do find it's interesting that some of the witnesses. You want to comment on that?
Yeah, we've put a scenario together. It's kind of tongue in cheek, but it's true. Everybody involved in the AZTEC crash, and I mean everybody, ended up being a millionaire later in life. What are the odds of that? And by that, I mean, Doug Nolan did very well. He left the AZTEC area and went out and opened an assay company in Nevada. And they would assay rocks to tell you how much gold per ton you had, or silver or whatever. One of the guys went on to own a very successful trucking company. One of the guys that actually was down at Walker Airfield and never was at the crash site, but worked on personnel records. We call him George in the book.
Yeah.
He went on to be a very successful businessman and owned a very successful large printing company that did very, very well, and on and on. I mean, you can just go through the profile, and by hook or crook, these guys did very, very well.
County Commissioner
did well.
It's fascinating to see. So I don't know if there's a correlation, but it does make you kind of question.
It makes me wonder. Or they're just all, smart people that are all wrapped up in this, right?
Right.
Yeah. Now, if you guys had a chance to if someone said, hey, let's produce a documentary on this, would you be game?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Somebody out there has got to do this.
Yeah. One was done back in 2004, but the wealth of information we have now compared to back then, not that we didn't have a lot back then, but I mean, it goes on and on and on. We've had a lot of incredibly good people working on our little team here.
Yeah.
And the case is so convoluted, though. It's a friend of ours out in California, Frank Warren, always says, he has the website UFO Chronicles. It's more twists and turns than a bag of pretzels, and he's absolutely right.
Well, that's why I think it would be great if maybe one day you guys do more conferences. My conversation with Kevin Randall, I think, is a perfect example, because he just ran with the whole "it's a hoax" thing, and you guys, in my opinion, completely turned that on its head. You presented so much evidence. I don't know how ufologists can ignore that. I did talk to Kevin about the fact that I think conferences need more debates, healthy debates, civil debates.
Right.
And I would love to see you both there and other people with opposing opinions and do that more. I think that the community needs that. All right. Well, thank you both so much for joining.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Suzanne.
no, there's nothing more stimulating than that, to see a good, healthy debate.
I agree. Absolutely. Thank you both so much. So where do people go to find out more about your work?
You can go to our Facebook page or Twitter page. We've got Instagram page too. We try to keep you know, just what's going on, or pictures of the area, and just keep you posted there. But in time, you will see the new book come out, and we will certainly let you know when that is.
All right, the AZTEC UFO Incident. Everybody go out and get this book. If you take ufology seriously, this is one of those books that you have to have on your shelf. This is Alan B. Smith for Paranormal Now. Thank you once again for joining us this evening. Tuesdays, 8 to 10 p.m. on KGRAradio.com, your official contact for the best in alternative talk radio. To find out more, go to KGRA.com/paranormalnow or on Twitter @paranormal_now. Stay tuned for Jimmy Church coming up next, and a special thanks to our KGRA producer, Bill Skywatcher. Until next time.
Thank you.